The relationship between aviation and healthy economic growth across the world has been long established. We've seen in geographies, whether it's developed markets or developing markets, if you've got a flourishing aviation economy where affordability and accessibility of air travel is encouraged actively by regulatory frameworks, active participants in the in the environment, you find that consumers have more choice, lower prices, and these all serves as input into healthy economic growth. Aviation is a massive industry globally. Generally, the industry accounts for probably $800 to $900 billion in turnover per year. And of course, airlines around the world, in terms of carrying their passengers around, rely very heavily on direct inputs, whether it's the energy sector in terms of fuel, whether it's aircraft manufacturing, high-value jobs, engineering industries, all serve as direct suppliers into the industry. In addition to that, there's indirect demand factors and benefits that accrue. There we're looking at anything from car rental companies, the porters working at airports, suppliers in the airport environment. And when you go further afield into the hotel industry, into busing, general transportation services, and the supply industry, whether it's fast foods, etc., all surrounding tourism, travel and tourism as a direct industry. So you can see that catalytic and direct and indirect demand is quite substantial. In Africa, we see that aviation contributes indirectly to approximately $80 billion in economic activity per annum. Directly, the industry generates approximately 7 million high-value jobs, full-time jobs on the continent. So the industry, most definitely from a direct contribution standpoint and indirect contribution standpoint, cannot be underestimated. Open skies in Africa has been a bit like watching paint dry in a sense. It's 30 years in the making. I'm encouraged by the progress achieved in, say, the last 2 to 3 years. The reality, however, is that the real work only starts now that regulators have to start talking to each other, finding ways to integrate the processes and procedures that will actively enable open skies. Open skies as a principle is novel. The work is really now to make it a reality. The open skies and economic integration, or any form of integration at a regional level, I most definitely encourage, generally speaking. To the extent that you better connect communities, let countries, removing the stumbling blocks from economic activity between countries in regional centers, it can only be a positive in terms of cultural understanding amongst countries, but as well as encouraging trade and tourism. The more we remove these stumbling blocks to a free flow of people and resources and interaction, the better ultimately for the world. I think that from a regulatory standpoint, firstly, removing some of these stumbling blocks, allowing a free flow of competition amongst carriers and countries, so that consumers get more choice, get more exposure to different cultures. So visa regimes, for example, making it easier for visitors to come to your country, actively using tourism bodies and promotional entities to make yourself known, your country known to your neighboring country and regions. So active participants in the part of private and public sector in terms of suppliers, in terms of the tourism product, as well as the transportation to this tourism product, as well as a regulatory environment that facilitates the free flow of people and movement of products and services. All of this is required to ultimately help foster a sustainable tourism industry on the continent. Fast-jet passenger profiles vary quite drastically on a route-by-route basis. If you look at routes like, for example, Johannesburg, Harare, where we operate 4 flights a day, we most definitely attract a large portion of business travelers. Our schedule is quite convenient for purposes of business travel. On other routes, if we look at Harare, Victoria Falls, for example, or Dar es Salaam, Kilimanjaro, these routes tend to be more dominated by leisure travel. So it's on a route-by-route basis that our profile varies between business and leisure travelers. Generally, again, our markets differ. Our Tanzanian market has struggled. The economy is in a tight spot in Tanzania, whereas the exact opposite is true in, for example, Zimbabwe, where there's been a bit of a euphoria in terms of the political change in that country. So we've seen very strong demand in Zimbabwe, we've seen strong demand in Mozambique, and somewhat more subdued demand in Tanzania. Well, I think that, in a sense, aviation, the internet, mobile telephony, all of these things share one core thread, and that is that we serve to connect. We connect people, we connect the leisure traveler with a leisure destination, we connect a supplier with a customer. And the more aviation becomes more efficient, the more it will reduce cost and improve reliability for purposes of supporting travel and tourism. Well, I think that, look, generally speaking, if I pick my own holidays, the first thing is that it needs to be a safe, secure environment that I'm going to. You need to have a political will to support tourism in each one of these countries, making sure that there is security, that you've got price points that are reasonable. Peter Drucker in the late 90s or late 80s talked about a value economy, and a value economy is really true now. People want value for money. I think we sometimes in Africa we tend to run the risk of becoming dollar denominated in our pricing mentality out to end consumers. So Africa is a high value destination, a high quality destination. The tourism and the wildlife, the beauty, the sheer beauty in our continent cannot be denied. But I think that as with Central Asia and East Asia, Africa remains a value proposition, a good money for value proposition. And the continent shouldn't move away from price itself out of the market ultimately. Airlines promote growth in tourism to the extent that they provide airlift, they provide connectivity. So to the extent that some of these really beautiful places in Africa is not adequately served through airlift and reliable air transportation, that city or that destination can never come to its full right or full potential. So the provision of reliable, safe and affordable air transportation to tourism destinations is the role that airlines play. Of course, it plays an ancillary marketing role to the extent that we consistently communicate with high-value customers with disposable income, and we typically have the means to communicate to this passenger base. We do serve as a marketing vehicle, but first and foremost, it is about efficient and reliable airlift and connectivity, and that's what we're supposed to provide. Airlines and the value chain within the travel trade are fundamentally closely intertwined. If you look at historically, cost of distribution, for example, in aviation was averaged between 10 and 15%, and that cost has to be defrayed and recouped from the paying customer. So to the extent that airlines and the travel distribution value chain, for example, can work closer together to avoid wastage, to reduce cost in the system, that would result in a lower cost in the hand of the paying passenger, and therefore more volumes and more business and more sustainability for all of us.